Tit-for-tat strikes have reduced the memorandum of understanding between the U.S. and Iran to a dead letter. The plan was to negotiate peace, a nuclear deal, and shipping through the Strait of Hormuz. Instead, there are near daily clashes. A continuous spiral of attacks and counterattacks has seen the U.S. hit sites in Iran and Iran targeting U.S. allies in the Gulf. Shipping through the strategically vital Strait of Hormuz has once again slowed to a near standstill, leading to a renewed rise in oil prices. Both sides want to control the waterway in the future and profit from it. Meanwhile, Iran's new supreme leader, Mojtaba Khamenei, remains invisible as reports about divisions in the regime grow louder and louder. On To The Point, we ask, is the Strait of Hormuz Iran's most powerful weapon? Welcome to The Point. I'm Nicole Fröhlich in Berlin, and I'm pleased to introduce today's panel. I'm joined by Jörg Lau. He's a foreign affairs correspondent with the German weekly newspaper Die Zeit. Melinda Crane is with us, surely a familiar face to many of our viewers. She hosted this very show for many years and served as DW's chief political analyst and chief political correspondent. Welcome home, Melinda. And joining us via video link from London is Ellie Geranmaye. She's the deputy head of the Middle East and North Africa program at the European Council on Foreign Relations. Thank you all so much for being with us today. I want to start with you, Ellie. Are the U.S. and Iran back at war, or is this part of the negotiations?
Look, they clearly are back at war, and they are risking not just unraveling this memorandum of understanding, which was a painfully negotiated document with many loopholes, but nevertheless it at least brought together a new vision for the relationship between the United States and Iran. They are also risking now regionalizing the war in a third wave. If you look at the first wave being the 12-day war, which didn't touch the region, the second wave, which was the 40-day war, really did grapple the entire region into it. And the third wave is expected to be even more escalatory. So there is a window now that mediators are working with both sides to try and pull them back from the brink before this becomes a much bigger, more disastrous regional war. But both sides have to climb down from their current maximalist positions on the Strait of Hormuz.
Yeah. Jörg, is anyone interested in an all-out escalation?
I don't think so. The Iranian regime has been severely weakened. The Navy is almost gone. Economically, they're not doing well. They need relief. And the U.S. has already done what they can do in the first wave of attacks. I can't see how they can achieve much more by escalating further. The Iranian regime doesn't seem to be willing to just capitulate. So, and then there's domestic issues in the U.S. I mean, the midterms are upcoming. So I guess there's an interest on the U.S. side, too, to actually climb down, but in a faith-saving way, and that's a problem.
You want to add to that?
Well, yes. A climb down would be one phrase. Chicken out might be another phrase. And it's quite interesting. If you look at what's happening on the oil markets, yes, the price has gone up, but it hasn't gone up quite as much as one might expect. Why? Because the markets expect that Trump will chicken out, as he so often does. And the big question for me here is, why did he resume the fight? Is it really about opening the Strait of Hormuz, or is it about the midterms and about his own face saving? The fact that Trump doesn't like to be embarrassed in public. And this is clearly an embarrassment that in a very asymmetric conflict, Iran retains a chokehold that allows them to essentially dictate the terms in this very important waterway. But I think in a way, de facto, what Trump is fighting for here is a principle of international law, namely free passage in an international waterway, and yet he utterly rejects international law as a guide for international relations. It's all about power for him. Yeah. But the key clause in that memorandum of understanding, which does contain many loopholes indeed, is actually phrased in such a way that it recognized Iran's control over the strait by suggesting that Iran would arrange for passage of ships through the strait. And that is unprecedented because it essentially allowed Iran to go on wielding a lever that is allowing it to hold the entire world economy essentially in blackmail.
Yeah. Would you agree? Is it a built-in part of the memorandum of understanding that has led us here now, that it was too open for interpretation?
Yeah. The paragraph number 5 of the memorandum of understanding is phrased in a very imprecise way. I mean, there's the wording is something like...
I have it here. Do you want me to quickly read it out?
Best efforts for safe passage.
The Islamic Republic of Iran will make arrangement using its best effort for the safe passage of commercial vessels with no charge for 60 days only.
Yeah.
Okay, best efforts. That is very much open for interpretation.
Obviously, the U.S. Interprets this as the strait will be open immediately for this period that is set for negotiations. And the Iranian regime interprets it the way that they have actually sovereignty over the strait. And all ships that want to make the passage have to go exactly the way the IRGC has framed it. So I don't see how you actually can find a compromise Ellie alluded to that is necessary to climb down from this escalation.
Yeah. Ellie, I want to get your opinion on something that Melinda alluded to, because this war is very unpopular at home in the United States with the voters, but also with Democrats, of course, but also a big chunk of Republicans. The Iranians know that. They know that Donald Trump is seeking a face-saving path out of this war. How much of an advantage does that give Tehran?
Well, it does give them an advantage to a certain extent, and this was being deliberated if you look at the conversations in Tehran leading up to the ceasefire and then the MOU. There was a bloc within the military that thought Iran should not have agreed to the ceasefire and should have actually increased the pain on the US and the global economy to ensure that there was a deterrent against any future US or Israeli return to bombing after the midterms. And so there is a bloc now in Iran that thinks they signed up to a peace deal too quick and they gave their advantage away. And I think one of the reasons why we have seen everything boil up in the Strait of Hormuz was a perceived understanding in Tehran that the United States essentially used the period during the Memorandum of Understanding to one by one take away Iran's cards as part of a future negotiations. So first came the Lebanon deal that the US brokered between Israel and Lebanon, which essentially tried to isolate Iran's ally there, Hezbollah. Then came the fact that the Americans were working now and pressuring essentially Oman to use this southern route to create a new normal in the Strait of Hormuz that denied Iran navigation control going forward. And finally, on the economic promises that the Memorandum of Understanding gave, this was basically whittled down to the smallest possible amount of frozen assets being released in Doha, and only then for humanitarian trade with US goods, presumably. So the penny dropped in Tehran that they were not really strengthening their cards in this MOU period, and they have been prepared to up the ante and potentially unravel the entire peace process because they want to keep their cards strong. And predominantly, in my view, that is because they have faced an existential war war with two nuclear-armed powers, Israel and the United States. And this is meant to be the last war for them. They don't want to be stuck in a Lebanon situation where every 6 months they are back at war. So my sense is that until we get a strong signal from the US that they are prepared to broker deals with Iran that actually give practical concessions, the Iranians will be willing to continue upping the ante.
It doesn't really look like the U.S. is ready to broker a deal that would be acceptable to both sides, does it? And just this week, we saw Donald Trump musing about a 20% toll for everyone trying to cross the strait. Yeah. What is the back and forth surrounding that toll? Because he quickly, said, oh, no, this is not going to happen. I did talk to our allies in the region. What does that tell us about his strategy?
Well, is there a strategy is the question.
My question to you, yeah.
I don't think there is one. He goes back and forth between threats, eliminating Iranian civilization, finishing the regime off, that kind of language, and then backing away and basically saying we're dealing with rational people. They are desperate to make a deal. This looks completely helpless to me. And I think it's also an escalatory factor because the Iranian regime obviously watches this and can only draw the conclusion there is no strategy there for the US to extricate themselves from this war in a face-saving manner. And that's why they think they have the upper hand, basically. If they just hold out a little bit longer, and we're approaching more and more the critical election season, pressure on Trump and on the U.S. military will rise to somehow finish this thing. And that's the situation. And I think it's really tragic also for all the regional powers that are basically bystanders and have no say whatever in how this plays out.
Yeah, absolutely. Donald Trump went to Congress to inform them about the fact that the war had resumed. Not that it had resumed, that a new war was underway. It's a new war because that changes.
Because that starts the clock again on when Congress would have to have a say. He is facing some pushback, including even from Republicans. They have essentially adopted resolutions in both the House of Representatives and the Senate that are largely symbolic, but that are critical, and that is reflecting public opinion. A third of Americans find this conflict worthwhile, 2/3 not, and that includes many Republican voters. So there is pressure on Trump, without question, to come to some kind of an arrangement that could be sold as a deal. The problem is he's gone way out on a limb in terms of what his goals are for any such deal. He insisted all along that the so-called JCPOA, the deal that was made under Barack Obama that included European powers, that was negotiated over 2 years with true experts on the Middle East from multiple countries, as well, of course, as Iranian diplomats. He said that deal was the worst deal ever and that he could get a better deal. And included in that better deal, from his point of view, would be limits on Iran's ballistic missile capability. The Americans are very worried that eventually Iran will have a capability that could enable them to send ballistic missiles all the way across the Atlantic to the U.S. Secondly, Iranian support for Hezbollah and for Hamas, and thirdly, the nuclear program. It doesn't look like any of those points are likely to go America's way anytime soon. So a deal much like the Memorandum of Understanding, which essentially put all those issues on ice and just kicked that ball down the road, that looks like maybe the best thing that could be achieved here. Maybe they could get something more on the Strait of Hormuz, but basically Iran has now discovered its own asymmetric power, the ability to shut that strait down simply with a drone on the back of a vegetable truck being fired against a ship. And the U.S., to keep the strait open, has to exercise a great deal more military power. So there's a huge asymmetry here, and Iran has much higher stakes in the whole thing. Trump would really undoubtedly just like this thing to go away, but that too apparently is not going to happen. So he's definitely facing a dilemma, and it will be interesting to see how he tries to find. I don't think he has a strategy, and I don't think he has an exit ramp.
Let's look at the current situation in the Strait of Hormuz, because since the resumption of hostilities, there have been fresh attacks on a nightly basis with no end in sight. Neither the U.S. nor Iran are showing any signs of backing down.
The U.S. recently struck approximately 140 targets in Iran in a single day. Reportedly, missile and drone sites, along with ammunition depots. The strikes were apparently in retaliation for an Iranian attack on a Western tanker. Iran appears unfazed, striking back at U.S. allies in the Gulf. The escalation continues.
Next week, it gets really bad for them because next week comes the power plants. Next week comes the bridges. We're going to knock out all their power plants. We're going to knock out all their bridges unless they get to the table and negotiate.
Once again, trade through the Strait of Hormuz has nearly ground to a halt. Iran is asserting control and wants to charge ships for passage, but the U.S. is also fighting for control, blocking and bombing Iranian ports. The Strait of Hormuz is just one point of contention in the stalled peace negotiations between the U.S. and Iran. An even bigger challenge is Iran's nuclear program. Is control over Hormuz Iran's true superweapon?
Elliot, let me extend that question to you. Has the Strait of Hormuz become a more powerful weapon than a nuclear bomb to the Iranians?
Well, look, Iran has a geostrategic position on the Strait of Hormuz. And this was a sort of sleeping lion that for centuries, Iran knew it had the capability to disrupt, but was only going to pull this card in this way that we've seen in the course of the war if it faced an existential threat. Now, it came face to face with that threat in a very serious way when its supreme leader was assassinated in the opening salvo of the war this year. And it did what it promised to do. It had gone around the entire region telling everyone, if we're attacked again by the US and Israel, this time we will close the strait, unlike the 12-day war. And it moved very swiftly to do so. And it has proven, as we talked about, in a very low-cost way, to have a weapon of mass disruption that, frankly, its nuclear program was not able to threaten the world in this sort of a manner. And so right now, the debate I'm seeing in Iran is a new red line discourse to say that whatever happens, our spoils out of this war, which has caused billions, we're talking over 300 billion infrastructure damage in the country, that despite this disastrous war for Iran and the high cost, it will have come out with a new degree of sovereignty and control over the strait. But I think what Iran has signaled time and time again in the last few weeks is that it is open to a compromise about the degree of that control and how it is exercised. And I actually do think there is a on-ramp, not an off-ramp, but an on-ramp for both the United States and Iran to take by first agreeing on some sort of a temporary transit route that Iran and Oman, with the US green light, can jointly approve shipping either through the northern or the southern routes that's currently established, to have equal numbers going through during the remainder of the Memorandum of Understanding period. And during that period, the US and Iran and Oman, plus other regional countries that are affected by the Strait of Hormuz, need to come up with some sort of a regionally backed management authority for the Strait of Hormuz. I don't think there is any return to the status quo ante. There needs to be a new normal. And the more I think the US has tried to exert maximum pressure against Iran to exclude it from that new normal, the more we are going to see Iran double down on trying to tighten its control over the choke point. Yeah. So the quicker they move to a compromise deal, I think the better it is for the US and its partners in the region.
Melinda, a new normal of Washington's own making, in a sense, right? This was not an item. This was not a problem they had before they started this war. Everyone saw it coming.
Yeah, absolutely. This and in many presidential administrations prior to Donald Trump, it was well known, as Ellie just told us, that this lever is there and might be wielded at some point in time if one doesn't tread carefully in dealing with Iran. But the U.S. basically signed up to Israel's war here. This was Israel's war, and there's a big debate going on right now in the U.S. about whether Trump has violated his promise not to engage in forever wars. Well, Israel's conflict with Iran is essentially a forever war. It's been going on, sometimes hot, sometimes cold, for decades. And the U.S. decided to get on board and clearly had been warned, the Trump administration here, also even by people like Ted Cruz before this war started, by Marco Rubio as well, briefly. He's now singing another tune. But the writing was on the wall, and yet Trump decided to go ahead because Trump essentially believes deeply in the power of maximum pressure when exercised by Donald Trump. He has an enormous estimation of his own ability to change facts on the ground with very little proof that is justified.
Jörg, it very much seems like Donald Trump has boxed himself in here. Does he have any good options?
No, there are no good options from his point of view. But the option that Ellie pointed out, that there can be a regional arrangement to manage the Strait of Hormuz, it may not be going back to the old normal before, but it could be a workable solution for everybody who's really involved. I mean, it's basically not an issue that is existential for the U.S. It could be a solution, but he would have to climb down from this idea that Melinda just pointed out, that America can dominate and just push its will on everybody else. It's not working in the Middle East. And it's basically, that's not news. I mean, we've had many unsuccessful attempts of, promoting democracy, overturning regimes. They have all not worked out. So maybe it's finally time to draw a line under these Middle Eastern wars of the U.S. and go for a different approach to the region.
Can I just say, I was thinking about Ellie's proposal and how that might fit together with Donald Trump's latest climb down. First, he said he was going to take 20% of toll fees going through this strait. Suddenly, after 24 hours, that was off the table. But he is now talking about massive investments that will be made by Gulf Council countries in the U.S. Well, I wonder how that might be linking up in his own mind with such an organization as Ellie described. If those two things could be brought together to save Donald Trump's face, well, yes, the U.S. won't be part of the council, but all the council members will be investing mega sums in the U.S. Maybe there would be some saving of face for Donald Trump in such an arrangement.
Ellie, I want to know from you, because we talk about this being a good off-ramp for everyone involved, but who really is calling the shots in Iran right now? And would that be an option for the people who are now truly in charge? Because it's not entirely clear who that is.
Look, I think that actually this idea that Iran is in disarray and unable to act is part of a campaign to weaken the diplomatic track. We have seen Iran, following the February attacks, despite its senior command and control being taken out, basically kick in a pre-designated Mosaic defense plan that for them, in their view, worked pretty well as pre-planned. You now also have a negotiating team that has been put together to have the first direct high-level meetings between Iran and the US under the Islamic Republic of Iran. A big taboo which existed under the former supreme leader has been broken. And no one has gone to jail for this in Iran. No one has been, assassinated domestically because of the pushback. There was a green light from the very top that understood there had to be direct negotiations with the United States if they were going to resolve their problems. And even today, this effort to essentially up the ante in the Strait of Hormuz, while not everyone in in the political establishment may agree, I think it has been done largely by consensus through a defense council that was created in Iran following the 12-day war to handle the national emergency period that they're going to face under the wartime conditions. And so everything that is done is, I think, done through a consensus building effort domestically. That doesn't mean everyone agrees with it, but we are not seeing the sort of major uproar of infighting that is being depicted from the outside. Yes, there is a very powerful, vocal minority group that does not want negotiations with the US. We saw them come out very vocally during the Supreme Leader's funeral recently, but they have still not been able to block the process. And we just saw overnight the Iranians released an American detainee on their way back to the United States. And to me, that's a indication that overall, Iran is still keeping the door open to diplomacy.
We'll have to leave it there. That's all the time we have today. I want to thank all our panelists for your input and all of you at home for watching. Join us again next week.